everyone, welcome back to another edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. I'm Alex Burkett, joined as always by Matt Whittemore. And Matt, we're going to go, a little bit back in time today. I think we're here to talk about what you are terming one of the most expensive lessons in your life. $250,000 investment in decision that cost you a $5 million investment deal. You've spent 5+ years of work into this project at Covered Bridge Campsite, one that we've talked for, I would say, a couple of years now since we've started this. But before we kind of get to that whole story, take us back in time a little bit in to the beginning and back to February of 2021. Can you just set the stage for us for this conversation?
Yeah, so it really probably starts before February 2021. It starts in 2019 and into 2020. I started buying small apartment buildings around Albany, New York, and immediately knew I hated being an apartment landlord and wanted something more, intellectually stimulating, more fun to do with my life than just being a landlord. And sort of in a roundabout way, I stumbled into the campground business first by way of looking at mobile home parks. So I flipped one little mobile home park deal, and then I've always been a off-market databaser and direct-to-seller type prospector with direct mail and cold calling and cold email. That's how I found about a dozen apartment deals and that little mobile home park deal. And so sort of by happenstance, I had a database of mobile home parks that was a very small percentage of those were actually miscategorized and were actually seasonal campgrounds in the Northeast, in Massachusetts and New England and in upstate New York where I live now. And so I started having these campground owners respond to my outreach and say, "Hey, dummy, this is not a mobile home park. It's a campground, but we might be sellers. So if you're actually interested in a campground, come check us out." So that resulted in me taking some tours around the Northeast and pretty immediately fell in love with the idea of building a portfolio of campgrounds. I always loved the idea of scaling a real estate portfolio. So my vision kind of pivoted to this world of campgrounds and RV parks, which I wildly underestimated what I was getting into and how much work it is and how much brain damage but also was lucky to find out that I loved it and that it was a really special industry to work in. I think I was more coming from the dollars and cents and the spreadsheet mentality and the macroeconomics and the trends in the industry of solid demand and compelling supply story, and all that stuff is true. But I'll tell you, don't get into this business if you don't love it, because it's not, none of us are in this business to get rich. And if you are, you're in it for the wrong reason. And so I started deliberately prospecting campgrounds and RV parks in that same area, upstate New York, New England. And one fateful cold email in February 2021 resulted in a seller responding to me and saying, "We're about to sign a listing agreement with a broker. You better get your butt down here and tell us if you're for real or if you like it." So I drove down there, trudged through a few feet of snow through the mountains in the Catskills. And it was such a profound experience because it is such a breathtaking property. It's so unique. It's so one of a kind, but it was also such a junkyard.
I was
Right?
going to say, set that scene. Obviously, coming from maybe more of the mobile home park world, people you're maybe more accustomed to seeing the property in not a great condition. I think you saw good bones there, but what was that like, kind of having to wade through the junky trailers and all of the stuff that was there when you were touring that property for the first time?
Yeah, there's a lot of campers in pretty rough condition that were active customers. Ones that you would have thought were deserted, but were actually paying customers, and broken down old mobile homes that used to be the two owners ago their residence, and turned into a storage unit with the whole boneyard around it with all the broken down equipment that never got thrown away, bunch of dumpsters everywhere, a bunch of overgrown debris, and like the old broken down honey wagon in the middle of everything, and um, really like I was overwhelmed but encouraged. I was overwhelmed by the really insane natural beauty of this place. I was also overwhelmed by the amount of deferred maintenance, right, that was in front of me. But for better or worse, right, some mentors and some coaching in the right entrepreneurial space and in the real estate investing spaces, right? All the best opportunities are the ugliest properties that everyone else is going to pass on. So, you know, that felt like this. So started negotiating, made an offer. Immediately knew I offered too much because they accepted the first offer, which is the worst feeling because you probably offered too much, but felt like it was a workable deal. Felt like I made probably a fair offer. And off we went into due diligence, which that was an adventure because I'd never done due diligence on a campground before, and it was a whole new world, and it was a lot of fun. I love to learn, so it was a lot of that. And it took 6 months to line up the financing, negotiate the deal, close due diligence, and get the deal closed. So fast forward to pretty much right smack dab in the middle of the season. It was August 2nd, 2021. That's a whole nother story in and of itself, right? I had the wrong mentality from the start that I was going to be a remote absentee owner. I was going to hire a manager. They were going to take on all the brain damage and figure it out, and I was going to collect rent checks and deposit them in the bank, and everything was going to work out great. And that's couldn't be there couldn't be a worse approach or attitude for the outdoor hospitality business. I learned that pretty quickly, and I was fortunate to learn that very quickly. And I had to because my idea of hiring a general manager that balloon popped immediately because they quit before they started. So I found myself, I think, probably having a panic attack the night before closing. I was laying in bed and my wife was sound asleep, and I was just staring at the ceiling like, what the hell did I do? What did I get myself into? Like, I have to now go live at this campground. I owned a house 2.5 hours away from where this campground's at. Never run a campground before. Um, Obviously had confidence in myself to figure it out, but it was just like I had just set myself up to be in a situation where that was going to be a big surprise. I don't know why. Like, I probably read too many guru posts on the internet about like how easy it is to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, just like figure it out, hire somebody else, easy, done. um but fortunate in that at the time I had a remote software sales job, so I was working probably 100 hours a week selling software while from behind the cash register at the campground, checking people in and out, doing all the landscaping, stacking firewood, doing honey wagon pump outs, helping people back their RVs into campsites in between software sales calls. My wife helped out a tremendous amount. She also had a full-time job, but that was flexible. So she was helping me, clean bathrooms and do all the stuff. So, always forever grateful to her for everything she's ever done for me. And it was 2 seasons pretty much of trying to figure out how to hire somebody and even just trying to find somebody. It's a very rural market. There's not a lot of population. There's not a lot of jobs. So it's right. It's probably something a lot of campground owners go through because a lot of times we're out in the woods, we're in the mountains. It's a village of 1,500 people. It's not a population center, and you got to work. You got to work to find people. I learned that even before closing. I put up LinkedIn ads and Indeed ads and Craigslist ads and got zero responses, which was probably where that a few weeks before closing is that maybe that panic attack started to set in of okay, nobody's responding. And then I put it out to my, like, on my personal Facebook, and an old high school buddy responded. And he's right. He had a girlfriend. He was moving his life over, 5 hours away. And, they just decided it wasn't for them, unfortunately for me at the last minute, which that's life. And so, yeah, it's a long story. It's been 5 years. We lived in a tiny home on wheels in campsite 17 with a dry flush toilet. Now, do you know what a dry flush toilet is?
I do.
I
But I was
don't.
going to say our audience probably does not understand the yeah, having to do that. I'm amazed that your wife stayed with you with the dry flush toilet that whole time.
So we didn't really use it. We were a short walk away from the bathhouse, so we would go to the bathhouse. But we were in this tiny 16-foot trailer, stick built tiny home on wheels with a lofted sleeping area. Can't tell you how many times I, tripped falling down, tripped going down the stairs. Um, you know, it was an adventure. It still is an adventure, honestly. So, you
Matt,
know,
I was going to say my question for you, obviously, with the purchase price of right at about 850,000 for 70 campsites, right? And as you and I know in the industry, that's not exactly large for an
no.
RV park or campground. What made you kind of pull the trigger? And I guess what did the numbers show you initially, where you kind of started looking at all of the stuff and all of the dumpy trailers and the garbage and what needed to be cleaned up? Was that something that kind of played into that decision? And obviously, you guys starting to live on site, you began executing on that transformation. So I guess just take us back from purchase price and what the numbers said to what you guys ended up doing.
Yeah, really good point. And it wasn't what I set out to find when I decided I wanted to buy a campground RV park. Right, it was a scaled business with stabilized revenue, a 200 site campground, a 150 site campground that had at least a few $100,000 in gross revenue, which now looking back, like that's not even enough. Like $1 million, right? You need at least 700,000 to market properly, to hire a staff that can handle all this stuff, right? So you look at all these three, four, $500,000 gross revenue campgrounds out there for sale, and they're beautiful properties and they're great, but it's like no can do. You're forever going to be stuck in this cycle of like underpaying people, but expecting them to, perform, and under marketing, but expecting to have good occupancy, and it's just a recipe for disaster. But back to your question, so it was not at all what I set out to find once I decided I wanted to buy a campground, but it was the natural beauty of the place that I didn't know what exactly it was going to be, but it was just it dawned on me that while I don't know what this place will be, I know it will be something special that generates revenue, and like there's a way to react. It was already a special destination that people have been tent camping there for generations. So it became a puzzle of how do I drive revenue with this, because just to be a sustainable business, it needs to have a lot more revenue. But my goal isn't to develop a super high end glamping resort that makes it unattainable to all the people that have enjoyed it for generations. We want to find a path to still welcome back all those families. I've have some very special memories connecting with people who, when they found out it sold and they saw me standing there, they couldn't wait to come and strike up a conversation and see who I was and see what my plans were. And, they shared really special stories about they're the fourth generation that's come back, and they come back every year. And now they have toddlers that are experiencing this wonderful place for the first time. And like, in moments where I was in some dark moments of, right, in the thick of it, couldn't get contractors to show up, got no showed by a contractor like 10 times in a row, and had problems I needed fixed. And I'm not a carpenter, I'm not a plumber, I'm not an electrician. And so there were times where I was up against it and really felt like maybe this was the wrong move and maybe I need to like quit. And then I would have that conversation with somebody, and this place meant so much to them, and that was so special to me, and that was the shot in the arm that really kept it going. And sometimes where I was second guessing what I was getting myself into. So yeah, I didn't know what it was going to be. I just knew I had a gut feeling that it could be glamping tents, it could be tiny homes on wheels. It was going to be some form of attainable lodging to accompany the primitive, secluded hike-in tent camping sites that we're really best known for, and then we have some really nice like drive up primitive creekfront tent sites as well. We have seasonal RVs, but I think the reality of the property is that it's not built for today's RVs. Like we still have some demand for seasonal RVers, but it's a heavily wooded, tight fit. I mean, it's a big property, but right, we'd have to like take out a bunch of trees and build roads and do things that are disruptive to what the soul of the place is to accommodate some of today's RVers. On the other hand, right, we have some really cool van conversions show up that are more off-road, off-grid capable, and that is a huge trend that I feel like I've seen in the industry, especially, I mean, we're 2 hours from the George Washington Bridge, 2 hours from Manhattan. So we have a very diverse customer base, including those that are some pretty hardcore outdoorsy people that invest a ton of money in off-road vehicles and van conversions. So we've seen those, and we have incredible creekfront sites that you can pull into. I myself am now a rooftop tent camper, and there's some incredible sites that it takes me 20 minutes to back in and get the right site, but like once you're there, you're sitting in your rooftop tent, you're looking out at the creek, at night the fireflies are everywhere, and like it's just really special. So I still don't know what it's going to be. I thought I had a pretty good idea, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I'm back to the drawing board now, so we're figuring it out as we go.
So Matt, you started down this journey of the transformation, right? You mentioned a couple of, frustrations that kind of lead us up to present day with adding, the glamping units to the property. You mentioned it took, over 2 years to find a reliable staff, having to kind of supplement that, and then kind of leading up to present day. While working on the operational problems, you also put some capital to work, right? Starting on the demo, a lot of the infrastructure in the property, renovating the bathrooms into a really incredible facility that obviously could be used by future lodging sites. That's $250,000 before you started, kind of exploring the route of finding additional capital. So walk us through just what were the challenges and the frustrations with finding a staff so you could actually kind of back up a little bit and focus on the bigger picture for the business. And then just walk me through how you started funding, what were going to be the upgrades and sort of all of the pre-work leading up to the lodging coming on site.
Really good question. So first, finding the staff. I think I had a crash course in like what makes our business special and what makes our business difficult is the people aspect. Right? Your business goes as your staff goes, right? And to really tie it back to the teachings of Danny Meyer, the enlightened hospitality philosophy is right. You run a good hospitality business by first prioritizing your staff, and then your staff prioritize your guests, and then your guests take care of the shareholders. And there's also a community aspect there too of being a contributing, member of the community. I was so deep in it that I was working odd jobs to make a couple bucks, and I was working at the campground and pretty much investing everything I was making back into the campground. We started with some funding from some investors, but other than that, it was really up to me to like make it happen. and definitely underfunded, right? Learned the lesson of not raising enough capital. I took the approach of buy the property, cash flow it, probably had unrealistic expectations to how fast I could raise the cash flow without major capital improvements. So learned that lesson pretty quick, and was just pouring pretty much every penny I had back into the property. And time flies, right? When it's a seasonal campground, in the season you're running the campground, and in the shoulder seasons you're getting to work to do some improvements so you're not disrupting the campground during the high season with construction and noise and disruption. And so it's just right, like it's insane how fast the seasons go by when you're in the seasonal campground business. I'm sure you can relate that, like, you're getting ready to open, and then you blink and it's August 1st and it's halfway gone, and then you blink and it's Halloween, like, and then you blink and it's January 1st and you're starting to thinking about opening again, and then it's May 1st. So bootstrapping really, to the fullest, which I commend anybody out there who bootstraps, but it's tough, right? Especially in a capital intensive business of, something real estate based, land based, infrastructure based. Capital is what you need to make it all work. And so, I feel like I had the awareness that I needed some more capital, and I didn't have that source immediately. So from you know from once I the whole focus was getting the day-to-day management taken care of, because I couldn't think about anything else while day-to-day management was on my plate. So, right, finally found this wonderful local couple, um, to run things, which I found through, right, local networking. And that's kind of the what I was alluding to earlier about learning, what makes our business special and hard, is that posting an ad online is not going to find you like your perfect general manager. And it took, right, every coffee shop, every restaurant, every bartender, every clerk in every store. I asked everybody, "Hey, I'm hiring for somebody. I need somebody to run my campground. Do you know anybody that would be good for that?" And finally, it was one of my contractors that brought the referral, and was a really fantastic day when we brought them on board. And right, it's been a process. I probably haven't done a really good service to them and training them and giving them the systems and processes that they need, because right, it once I got them in that seat, it became, all right, I need to fund this business and I need to grow this business. And that's been the last few years, right? It was 2 years to get them in the seat, and now it's been 2 years of talking with different investment groups, getting pretty close, and then right, it's been a wonky economy and commercial real estate market and lending market, right? So it hasn't been easy. And then really the last year has been building this particular relationship that I just wrote about in the newsletter. And so, it felt like I had saw that's what kind of stings the most about this, is I felt like I found the perfect solution, right? It was a group with deep pockets that had the vision, had the creativity. It wasn't just real estate private equity worried about what their Q1 distribution is going to be. It's a long-term outlook. It's wanting to create something special, prioritizing that over a long period of time, and then worrying about the financial returns, which I think is right. If you're going to get into this space and take a rundown old campground or develop a new glamping resort, that really needs to be, your focus, right? We've got all the big boys coming in with Marriott and everybody, but that's not how those portfolios started, right? Getaway wasn't started with the idea of, like, what's my Q1 distribution. It was started with the idea of, let's create something special that gives people access to nature. Same with Under Canvas. Same with, right, all these different groups that are now selling for hundreds of millions of dollars, and or getting major investment from major corporations. That's all well and good, and that's fantastic. But I don't believe those companies were started with those kind of exits as the plan, right? Maybe part of the plan, but that's where we depart from real estate in my mind, is like in an operating business, in a tech business, in a whatever business, like your your driving force is not profit. Your driving force is solving a customer problem or delivering something to a customer that they value, right? And getting really good at that, and then worrying about the money. And I see a lot of people getting into this business that they're worried about the money first and foremost, and they might succeed. They might be really smart, and maybe the joke's on me, but I don't think that's the scalable, you know, path to success in this kind of business.
Matt, you wrote in the newsletter that, working through this, capital challenge, right? Coming out of this mode of self-funding and finally finding an investment group. It wasn't just about the money for you. This was about more of validation, right? After working, through and finding people to help on the development side and kind of putting, I would say, a loose concept together as to what the vision was going to be for that next phase of the property. Can you just walk everybody through, what did you mean by that, and what was that feeling like? It's not every day. Most people probably aren't in conversations where there's, even that large of a chunk of money potentially on the line. So just kind of take us back to that moment, and what did that mean as far as validation goes?
So I always felt like I have decent instincts, and that like I'm not a crazy person. Maybe I am. I'm probably sometimes a crazy person, but like I felt like I knew right back to when I first stepped on the property that this is something special. This is unique. You can't recreate what we got going on here with the mountains and the wildlife and the creek and just the setting. And that's right. I didn't invent that. I didn't create that. I can't take credit for that, nor am I trying to. It's just kind of, if it works out, it's dumb luck that I emailed the right person on the right day and decided to drive, myself down there for a few hours and go check it out and then make the offer. Like that, I'm no like revolutionary or genius or anything. I think a lot of people probably would have had the same thing happen. If anything, and I think it's a double-edged sword. Like I'm pretty stubborn and I stick with things. It could be to my detriment. I think a lot of times it probably has been to my detriment, but I think I've also made some things happen, and persistence is probably one of the number one reasons. So in terms of the validation, right, there's always been these, just exhausted moments of second guessing myself, and just right, the challenges mount and it feels like everything's against you, and like I'll be sitting at home, and like probably my wife gets the brunt of this, but just like the negative self-talk of like maybe this isn't real, like maybe this place isn't that special, maybe I've been chasing something that's just not even viable or feasible or worth the trouble. So I've had a lot of those moments, and I've gotten close with a few different investment groups, and it is right. It's a very niche type of investment, right? I'm not syndicating an apartment complex. Like this is a very like specialized development, specialized type of business. It needs somebody that sees the vision, and there's not that many people out there. So got the LOI for like almost a $5 million commitment. That felt like a big win, right? And that's almost a year ago now. That's a solid 10, 11 months ago that we started, putting it on paper. And right, negotiations are hard, trying to put two different investment groups together Took time. It did not happen without any friction, so that delayed things for a while. Um, just life happens, right? It was through the holidays, and then it was through the winter, and we were still moving forward. We were working through some due diligence, working through some concept stuff, revising the business plan a few different times, and then it got time to open the park. So it's like my attention is diverted to that. It was also really time to like level up our marketing and our programming and our activities. And so I was right. I had hired a social media manager. Shout out Gabby. She crushes it on the Instagram and the TikTok and putting a lot of effort into that. I'm not a short form video guy, so like I took courses for short form video because I really wanted to understand it, and I saw that that's a big part of our business is connecting with customers and prospective campers on social media via short form video. Did a bunch of giveaways, did a bunch of local business partnerships, like probably stuff I should have done years before, because I think that's a necessity in our business. Back to that enlightened hospitality philosophy of being part of the community. So probably, you know, right. I had the faith that we were going to close this deal. So it became a race to build as much momentum ahead of time to get the online presence really humming, build the email list, build the local partnerships so that when we come out with these really cool lodging options, it's like a big splashy thing. And like, we're doing friends and family and inviting all the local business owners and employees to come stay for free and just creating the buzz and the flywheel of good karma and attention. So months and months went into that, and I just had the faith that this deal was going to close. And life happens, things slow down, negotiations are hard, and I came up with the idea of let's buy these tents on a revenue share deal.
Right, and that's where I was going to lead next, Matt. Was you started and just kind of closed the loop on trying to get the operation solved as much as you could.
Right, it was like we're not really prepared for like multiple lodging units, so I put a lot of thought and you know behind the scenes work into software integrations and just planning and how are we going to set up our linen closet and how are we going to turn units and trying to find cleaners to come in to help and all that stuff because I wanted to hit the ground running, which is there's no excuse and there's no woe is me here, right? These are all decisions that I made that ultimately, the buck stops with me. And yeah, do I feel like I was let down by some people? Absolutely. But ultimately, I chose to run with those people, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. So, yeah, go on, take it where you wanted to take it.
Yeah, so at the time of, kind of beginning through this development process, the campground had one lodging unit on site already. So there was a little bit of that toe dipping, right, where you were
Yep.
seeing good ADRs and rates, and there was a solid, demand with this one unit. And when you started down with, okay, there's this feeling of new capital coming in the door where you were working through that process and you were again trying to, find a development team and put together a concept for what these units were going to be. You did not, within that stick with that initial one unit that was brought in, the A-frame cabin that was there prior. So I think people would probably start to ask, why not? Why not continue with more of those? Or what was the vision with saying we want to do something different and make a big splash with what were ultimately these glamping tents that you brought in?
Yeah, a few factors there, right? The A-frame did great. That was also on a revenue share deal, and it just wasn't a long-term fit with the owner of that unit there. And those are very expensive. They
Right.
were right. They're 130, $140,000 unit that if we could get decent winter occupancy, that's a good investment. But on a seasonal property, it's not a commensurate ROI on a 6 month schedule, and so that served as a proof of concept to test, right? Is there demand for at least one unit, right? And so then it became the puzzle of speed to market, right? Of setting units up quickly without, you know, it's a fine line, it's a gray area in the world of campground development of
And working with the local building department.
exactly. So, right, what's a camping unit? What is just by default approved to be used in a existing campsite? And you probably get different answers from different people on different days across the state of New York, right? I think there's room for interpretation, and there's different just personalities at play and everything. So it was we were trying to thread the needle with that, right? Like building decks was going to require a building permit, and we're in a flood zone in the property. So that was going to be a headache, not insurmountable, but not conducive to let's get 6 units up and running tomorrow and start to prove the concept and generate some buzz and drive some revenue. So we were trying to thread that needle of, right, minimizing the red tape as much as possible, obviously being compliant and not, right, not skirting the laws, but, right, minimizing red tape, getting units up and running in operation, generating revenue, and then assembling the team, right? We were in talks with landscape architects and engineers and art directors, and like we had a dream team of people to go make this a really cool property. And that was what was so exciting about it, right? Going from bootstrapped to and spread very thin mentally, physically, financially, to having funding from people with deep pockets and to hire every expert you'd ever need. That was going to be a lot of fun, to approach a project that way from a true professional development standpoint and not bootstrapped, but such is life. So remind me, what was your question again?
Was really right, like why did this concept make sense? As far as, obviously you talk about speed to market, but there was kind of,
Yeah.
being in the Northeast in this climate, these are soft shelled units. This is something that, as you're trying to look at like what's going to be the best fit for the uniqueness of the property, like what were either the features, or as you walk down this path and, obviously looking at tens and dozens of different types of units that could fit, what ultimately was it that kind of landed on this decision, and what ultimately was going to be phase one of the development?
Good question, and I want to answer that question without saying anything that could be construed as defamation or anything, because we're in that kind of situation with the vendor, unfortunately. And that's what it ties back to is, right, they made lots of promises about day one setup, revenue from day one, set up in 2 hours. It was a temporary unit but was also durable, supposed to be durable and weatherproof and all these things and high end materials. And so it seemed like the solution that was going to help us thread that needle of low impact development. I don't really need to build anything. I'm setting up a temporary tent that, will last the whole season. Then we'll pack it away for the off season. And, I think we're realistic that soft sided units in our type of environment aren't going to last for 10 years, maybe not even 5 years. But if I can get close to 5 years out of them, I can do new canvas. I can get new canvases. The metal and the wood, if they're cared for properly, should last 20 years. The metal should last forever. So it seemed like the perfect solution to thread that needle of speed to market, cool product, you know, not having to build anything per se. And it fit in right with the kind of off-grid feel of the property, right? We have water and electric sites. These don't have bathrooms, so it didn't need the brain damage of like figuring out how to offer an off-grid bathroom, which I've never liked the idea of composting toilets, dry flush toilets, all that. Like people use them and there's some great technology these days, but it's always it's always
It's
made me
hard to put that with the more higher end unit that's kind of cool and rugged and
right.
outdoorsy.
Right. So, we selected this and it also came under recommendation from, somebody that I still think very highly of, but they brought this person into my life and vouched for this person, and it turned out to be a total, complete and utter disaster, honestly. Like a shockingly bad disaster that I feel like when I tell people the story, I probably have people doubting that it's real because it's like that unbelievable, like for how this was all handled. So, I think we've on their side, we've been painted out to be a tough customer and like bullies and a customer that would never be happy. But I mean, we just wanted what we paid for, right? And we offered some flexibility. We offered some solutions. We came to the table, and basically it was tough luck. That's manufacturing. We're going to need another year to give you actually what you paid for. They sent us used replacements, which were like almost functional, but that didn't change the fact that these units got tons of rain through the canvas.
That's what I was going to ask, right? As it shows up, right?
Yeah,
You're
so,
there.
yeah.
You're
Let's
there
tell
on.
the story of let's just tell the whole story of delivery day because it's just so crazy. Like,
So, man, obviously, this comes together as far as the concept goes. A unit is picked out and identified. You kind of begin the conversation with the team there, and we get to the point of which the order's taken place and everything's supposed to, arrive on site with that kind of easy setup. You're obviously there, ready to set it up, get everything online, get revenue in the door. All of that operational work has been done to, begin to market to them and let people know that these units are available. Just what happened when the tents arrived, what showed up versus what was, expected.
so it really starts right before. So we had ordered these tents on around April 1st, the first week of April. We sent a 50% deposit, almost $100,000 we sent to this company.
Yeah, and this was $250,000 total for 6 units.
With $200,000 for the tents, with $204,000 with tax and delivery. So it was $180,000 tent order. But we also ordered a bunch of FF&E and invested a bunch in marketing. Right, we were really leaning into the short form video. So, but let's back up to before the tents arrived. So we were promised an 8-week turnaround time. That was missed, which that's fine. There's delays. Like we're not going to go crazy on anybody for like missing a deadline. But the first red flag was, right, I get this sob story from the CEO of the company about how they lost their canvas manufacturer in Hurricane Helene, which I want to look this up because I don't like when was Hurricane Helene.
Not exactly, super recent.
Right. So Hurricane Helene was in September 2024. So that was 9 months before the delivery date. So I get this sob story that we lost our canvas manufacturer. They weren't transparent with us that, right, they were shutting down. So apparently there was some idea that they were going to get back up and running, but apparently their facility was destroyed in Hurricane Helene. So I don't know how fast you can get a production facility back up and running. But that was the first kind of red flag of, I'm getting this story of, they don't know when delivery is going to be. They're going to keep me posted, and kind of revealing that they don't have the canvas figured out. And so reported this back to the new investors, and like, they have our money already. All we can do is wait. And then, all right, we get the good news call, and I think like probably June, like 3 weeks later, we're working to schedule delivery. I think it was like the 21st. It was either Friday. It was probably the 21st.
I think, yeah, I've been remembering, back, this was trying to like get the tents up before July 4th, right?
Hmm.
I think that was kind of the, okay, we might have missed, Memorial Day or the beginning of the season, but you've still got a nice chunk of the year to
Right.
capitalize on revenue.
Right. And for the record, this is me recalling verbal conversations and everything. So, to any, if this gets forwarded to any attorneys, I'm not, I'm not, quoting facts here. I'm remembering it to the best of my ability. So, right. So we get that weekend is delivery date, and um, we get the units on the back of a flatbed. There's a couple team members from the company there, and they're starting to unpack the units. And right, the expectation that's been set is 2 hours setup, right? It's all over the website, it's all over the marketing, it's everywhere. And so we're like, okay, it's a weekend, right? It's 6 units. It's 2 hours per unit. It's 12 hours. Bang this out in 2 days. We'll be good to go. We'll be ready to rent by Monday, right? And so we start unpacking the units, and then they bring to my attention that there's no canvases in the order. And so the CEO is not there. I think I was expecting the CEO to be there for the installation, but he had more important things to do. So they're calling the CEO because they have no information. These guys don't know why there's no canvases, which is so insane to me. And they they get, oh, no big deal. It's a shipping issue. You're gonna get the canvases tomorrow, which again starts to raise red flags. Like, why were they shipped separately? And so come to find out, they came from a different source. They came direct from the canvas manufacturer, which we understand to have been the first run, the first basically trial prototype run. I'm not a manufacturer. I don't really know the lingo, but this was like a new test run with a new canvas manufacturer that they hadn't QC'd. So they were QCing it right in front of us on site. They immediately alerted us to like a multitude of issues. The last one that we found out, right? The stitching was wrong. The Velcro was wrong. You could see through the canvas. You could see through the stitching. You could see daylight through the stitching. All these things. And so okay, we'll try it. And commendable to them to like alerting us right away that something wasn't right, because I probably wouldn't have known the difference until it was too late. And so we get to putting these things up, and I had deliberately kind of pushed, once I knew it was going to be late, I tried to finesse to a clear forecast, because I didn't want to be setting these things up in the middle of a rainstorm for obvious reasons. So we had clear forecasts, and honestly, it's probably fortunate that we got a surprise thunderstorm so that we could discover this major problem while people were still on site. So we get the next day when half of these are up. Three of the canvases are up, or two or three of the canvases are up. We get a surprise, really heavy thunderstorm, and lo and behold, it's raining straight through the canvases. And another thing, come to find out, right? These wooden bases are not sealed, so these are not intended to get wet. And they have a platform bed that has a big cavity under the platform bed. There's like a foot of water in the cavity in the platform bed. All the floors were wet. All the baseboard of the bed was wet. Everything's soaked inside. So we're scrambling, towels, wiping everything down. Got the shop vac, sucking all the water out, putting tarps on everything. In the middle of this big thunderstorm. And so obviously these things were not waterproofed, which major oversight. Obviously, the one function that we would expect to get out of these canvases is that they are waterproof. It's kind of the only important thing about that you would expect, to be incorporated into the design and the manufacturing here. So, and then it started the battle of pushing and fighting and scratching and clawing to get them to do a fix. Some, and again, I'm just kind of, I don't have all the timeline up in front of me, but a couple weeks went by and they came up with the solution of sending us six they sourced used canvases to put over the top of these structures. And that was a battle, right? They didn't want to send them. We had to fight for it. And they send the six canvases. And they didn't QC that either because we pull out the six canvases. Three of them were unusable. Two of them were busted at the seam. One was ripped, completely ripped next to the seam. The other one was busted at the seam. And then the third one was as if a cat or some sort of animal with really sharp claws, I kid you not, like 50 to 100 1-inch little cuts, like a cat or a lizard or something was climbing all over this thing. And it took us setting it up and going inside and the sun shining through and looking, and there was daylight coming through all these 50 to 100 incisions on the roof, on all the walls, everywhere. And like, I'm not going to patch that. There's no way to repair that. I'm not going to patch it. You're going to have 100 patches all over this, a very expensive canvas. And so then had to get back into the fight of, hey, you better send me three more canvases. They didn't want to do that. They hemmed and hawed and spending hours on the phone solving these problems. And then they sent, three more canvases. So then we were like, all right, we're starting to see daylight here. Honestly, we have six almost functional canvases. They needed a lot of work. I had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars if somebody come and sand down all the wooden base because they got trashed in the rain. These people didn't take any care to protect these during the install process. So dirt and boot marks, and we tried baking soda and vinegar and all kinds of cleaning solutions, sponges, brushes, on our hands and knees, scrubbing these things for hours. And then the only thing we could do was sand it down and refinish it because these things were trashed before they'd even had one person stay in them. The rain, right? Damage for the rain, like wood's warped and all. It's plywood, so it's not meant to get wet. It's not pressure treated. And so just fighting and scratching and clawing and trying to assure my investors, the new investors, that there was a path through this. It took the company sending us 15 canvases to find six that were at least had a path to making usable. And, we figured at this point we weren't going to get what we wanted out of this company. So we agreed to like take it upon ourselves to make the six best canvases workable. And then they immediately started demanding us to send the other 9 canvases back, and that we were disrupting their business, their operations, causing them damages, causing them loss of revenue, of emails, claiming damages, like they're gonna come sue us now or something. So this has been the tenor of this conversation back and forth, and we after some months of the fight and trying to get them to deliver a semi-workable solution, we kind of stopped communicating with them. He's still emailing me back and saying, when can I come pick up my canvases? Um, it's like these are the things I think back on, and it just feels and sounds like unbelievable.
So, Matt, as you described, things kind of have gotten a bit contentious at this point, kind of getting into that legal territory. At what point did you realize that maybe, this wasn't just a problem with this particular vendor, but this was something larger that was beginning to kind of interfere with this new investor relationship that you had started developing, right?
Right.
As you said, not only could you not photograph these and guests weren't coming in and you weren't getting any of the revenue, and this was obviously costing revenue for the campground, right? These are 6 sites that aren't generating anything from RVs, from tents, right? You're using them as you're going through the development process. At what point was it known that this was something a lot larger?
It's a good question. So, we're going through July, through August, through September of fighting and fighting and trying to figure out a way to like solve this. And I, learned a lot about Canvas in the process, learned a lot about, hopefully the next time I go out to buy these types of units, I'll be more prepared. And it was a collaborative effort, right? The, my contact with this investment group put in a ton of time and effort into solving this too. So I always believed that, we're in this together. We're going to figure this out. This is just a speed bump on the way. But I think such is life that time and delays and uncertainty go back to a group and, particularly individuals with very deep pockets, right? This isn't a big deal to the people that were putting up a lot of the money. Um, so I think it just turned into a headache that was unnecessary. And it was, right, time and uncertainty and time kills deals, the ultimate real estate and sales cliche. So I think that's at play here, right? They probably detected some incompetence. Maybe they started to doubt, what I was made of and what my ability was, which is fair, right? I mean, I brought these people to the table and it was an unmitigated disaster. So that's the reality. I still believe in the project. I'm still going to keep at it. Um, it was always professional and cordial with the investment group, and I hope there's a way to do some business with them in the future. But it's not going to be this deal, unfortunately.
So just talk to us a little bit about, that call, right? And what happened when that conversation came. What did that feel like essentially, at least from, as you said, this deal and this investment group to kind of see them pull back, right? And now beginning that process for you of still finding a way to make the project work, but beginning this shift of finding where do you go from here?
Really good question, and it wasn't a total shock because this was a really trying thing, and it was a disaster, as we've said. We've used that word a lot, and so I think late and probably in the last 30 days, it felt like that was a very real possibility that there wasn't any coming back from this. And so I had warmed myself up to the idea that this was all dead. And so it wasn't a shock. It was certainly a disappointment. It was being on the phone and, you know, thinking, what the heck am I going to tell all the stakeholders in this? Like, what am I going to do? Should I just pull the plug? Right? It was another big one of those second guessing moments of what did I get myself into? Maybe this is never going to happen. Maybe it's time to move on with my life. And, I don't necessarily see that as quitting, right? Um, I still love the project. I still love the property. I still believe in it. It doesn't need to be this big grand $5 million vision either. It can be a much smaller project and still be impactful and still be a really profitable investment. But that was what the capital largely dictated that I was engaged with was, when it's big groups with big money, a lot of these groups have, $20 million minimum checks, right? Like a $5 million check is usually pretty small to these types of groups. So that was what dictated it. I welcomed the input from a group that had done some development and had some vision and had a lot more money and experience than I do. So that was appealing, but it wasn't necessarily the top scenario I would have painted for the development of the project. Right? We totally flipped it on his head. I went from bootstrapping it to like having all the money in the world to design the biggest scale, most compelling financial project, right? I don't want to like sound like we were just gonna like clear cut the forest and like destroy the beauty there, because that was never the vision. It's always been with a lens of conservation and preservation and maintaining this place that people have been returning to for generations. We're not trying to displace those people or price them out or anything, right? Primitive tent camping was going to remain a core of the soul of this property. It was going to be relatively pretty low cost. I'd say relatively very low cost cabins, tents, keeping prices attainable, and preserving those primitive tent camping options for the people that don't want a glamping tent or don't want to stay in a tiny home and they really want to rough it, because that's coming back in a big way. So it's back to the drawing board. I think the beauty of this property is that there's options with it, right? It could be a smaller project, it could be a bigger project, it could be seasonal, it could be let's try and go year round. I think if I've learned anything, it's that there's different approaches to this business. There's super unique lodging, high design, high cost, really wow the people with architecture and design and jaw-dropping units. And that works, right? I'm not going to say that doesn't work. But you can also have like a pretty basic yurt and some killer programming and some killer activities and really ratchet up the community aspect and probably get relatively similar ADRs in my mind, right? With a $20,000 yurt, with a, $20,000 safari tent, right? And that's the model that I feel like I have gravitated towards. Is it's almost kind of lodging unit agnostic, and it's all about the intangibles, right? The people aspect, the programming, the activities, the community. And that's to tie it way back to the beginning, which I think was kind of subconscious for me for a number of years. When I bought this place, or shortly before I bought this place, I was living in Center City, Philadelphia, working remotely. This is, 2018 and into 2019 and into 2020. Was working remotely from a small apartment in Center City, Philadelphia on the 13th story. I don't think I am necessarily like a great work from home kind of person. I need like getting out and meeting people and going to different settings and like getting some steps in my life. And I found myself in this rut of I was working from home, selling software, living in the city. Like there's was days where I didn't leave my apartment building. I didn't take a breath of fresh air because I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I would get to my desk and start my work day, and then I would blink and it was nighttime, and like could order Uber Eats or whatever, or cook something at home and like literally not step outside. And I was buried in spreadsheets and like in front of a computer screen all day long. And I don't know that I consciously was searching to just flip that on its head and find something so radically different. But that's where I ended up, was buying a campground in the remote woods and going to like try my hand at being like a mountain man. And it was like a shock to the system that I feel like I needed. Again, I think totally subconscious. But I think that's kind of the core of this whole journey. And something that have discovered a real passion for is that this was even before COVID. And now in COVID, I think everyone experienced that to some degree of I'm on Zoom calls, I'm in my house, I'm not active, I'm lonelier than I've ever been because I connect with people via a screen. And so, right, that's an epidemic. I'm not, it's not a novel thought on my end. You can read dozens of articles and studies out there about people are more depressed and lonely and disconnected than they've ever been in our digital world. And it's a problem. and going out into the woods and looking at some stunning natural beauty, watching a bald eagle fly down the creek and snatch a trout right out of the creek, or watching a beaver build a dam, or watching a mother black bear and her cubs meander across the creek and climb up the mountain, and going for a hike and swimming, in the waterfall swimming hole, and just, taking a time machine to go back 30 or 40 or 50 years to what it was like when people used to connect in a real way. That's what this place is. And that's right. It's finding a way to offer that to more people and making it a sustainable business that will last, will stand the test of time and open that up to more people. So that's that's what I think subconsciously it was always on that path, but I think it took me probably until about a year ago to realize that was the purpose and that was the mission here.
I think as you just touched on, right, the why behind it, and coming out of this type of experience that is certainly shocking in a lot of different aspects. Um, the property itself is still really spectacular, and I think your passion and your vision, as you just described, hasn't changed much. You still see what this could be. And you wrote in the newsletter that you're not done yet. You don't know if this is something that can survive, but you're trying to make it work. And I think you're being really incredibly honest about that. I think people have come mad as they've, heard, watched you write or heard us on the show. You tell it like it is. You're kind of a no bull kind of guy. So, what does the next 6 months or even year look like for you? And kind of, what's next? Is this getting additional funding? Is this kind of going back to the drawing board and self-funding this? But, what is next for Matt Whittemore at this property?
Really good question. If you had asked me that, it's been 8 days now since I got that call, and it's been a feels like a lifetime in some ways over the last 8 days. Because there's been, right, it's like the steps of grieving of like at first it was like, well, I think I'm done here, and that lasted for about 24 hours, and then I got back to my stubborn self and was like, no, like we're gonna make this happen. And it's I don't have right. I don't know what the path forward is. Some things have come up in the last week that give me hope and give me a renewed kind of sense of purpose in continuing to pursue it. Um, there's options. It's kind of getting to that point of, like, to use a sports cliche, right? It's like, 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and it might be 3rd and 20 or 4th and 20 from my own 10-yard line. We might be approaching that territory, but as a Patriots fan, I've seen Tom Brady pull that rabbit out of his hat a few times.
I was
Maybe
going to
maybe
say, or
Drake,
if you're,
maybe
or if
Drake
you're,
may now.
or if you're Aaron Rodgers, who kind of
Yes, exactly. Yes.
became known for the Hail Mary, you might have it in the bag.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if we're quite there, but it's the fourth quarter for sure, and we've, we've got a lead to chip away at. So I don't know the answer to that. I think there's options. I'm pursuing them all. I'm trying to find a way. I think I do have it in me. And right. I've spoken with some really smart, generous people to share some time with me in the last week that I've had the privilege of networking with over the years, and have shared this story, and some more experienced entrepreneurs than me. And right, one of the big takeaways was, it's not even if it does end up being a failure, right? It's lessons learned, it's experience, it's skills acquired. Was a term. Shout out Andrew on that one. Um, so that's where I'm at. It's a bummer. It's a bummer. It's a stressful situation. It's not the best situation to be in, but it is what it is, and it's got to just got to keep working at it.
Matt, I want to end this with kind of some lessons or some advice, right, to somebody who either might be in this situation. Obviously, I think you would say, I certainly hope nobody else is in this situation, but you wrote 3 lessons in the newsletter this week talking about, and I'm going to go through these briefly and give you some time to expand and give some advice for anybody going through this type of development project. So, first is that development requires deep pockets and some incredible patience. The second lesson you mentioned is referrals are not due diligence. And then finally, one bad decision with investor money can erase years of trust that you built. So, what advice do you have? And obviously, you've had some time to process this now. Obviously, the investor call is recent, but this has been a long journey and a long process. So, just what advice and lessons would you have for people as we start to wrap up?
Really good question. So on the first one, right? Development requires deep pockets and incredible patience. I don't have either of those things. No, I would say I'm learning to be more patient, but I grew up in the suburbs of Boston with two parents from Boston where, you know, the culture of being a masshole is, get to it, right? Like patience. I think I'm right. I'm still young and I've got a 3-year-old kid now. I'm certainly learning patience, but that's a different kind of patience when you're talking about real estate development, right? There's setbacks, there's disasters, right? You're just a professional firefighter. We talk about that on the campground operations side all the time. That right, being a campground manager is being a professional firefighter. Being a real estate developer is being a professional firefighter. And right, everything's expensive these days. Everything takes forever. Everything's expensive. It's so easy to get sucked into making that spreadsheet work. And right, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to take longer. And right, it's beyond that, right? You need a deep team and you need experts. And right, that's the conflict of like bootstrapping versus professional development in my mind, which I think a lot about is like, to do right. One approach in hindsight would have probably resulted in me never buying this property because a lot of development pros would tell you don't right make the development plan and entitlements if there are any part of the due diligence process and don't acquire the property until you can right complete the development both on the regulatory and municipal side and on the funding side. So I didn't have either, right? There was always this kind of gray area of like it's going to remain a campground and we're going to do lodging options that work within the campground land use, which is still the plan, but I didn't have the funding lined up. It was buy it now, cash flow it. It's kind of a covered land play, figure the funding out later. Betting on myself to be able to do that. Contingencies can't have enough contingency in that spreadsheet when you're developing that budget. Operating reserves can't have enough operating reserves. And then right tying into the vendor side, right? Don't deploy that capital with a vendor and right hold back some money. Unfortunately, right, I never imagined that it could have gone this bad because I felt like I had an in through my contact who brought this option to the table. I felt like that was my insurance policy and it wasn't a good enough insurance policy, unfortunately. So, and that ties right into the next one of, referrals are not due diligence. And that's a conflict of like, right, you want to trust and I feel like it's human nature to just trust people and to rely on people and you have to really balance that out with really good checks and balances. You know, you might offend a referral source by triple checking and I should have gotten references. I should have dug deeper, right? In short, investigate everything and trust nothing. And it's a tough, right? It sounds crass and it sounds kind of impersonal and all that, but it is what it is. And then the third one, right, is when investor money is involved, right? You can spend your whole life, and that's another kind of a business cliche, but you can spend your whole life building trust and lose it all in an instant. And it's that much more impactful and severe when we're talking about investor money. So I'm not surprised, right? I don't fault the investor for the way it played out. It's on me. It's on me at the end of the day. And like it's not about the blame game of the vendor either, right? They screwed us royally, don't get me wrong, but guess what? I picked them. So at the end of the day, that's on me. And that's what I have to live with, and that's the lesson I have to learn. You know, you can bet your bottom dollar that the next time I'm selecting vendors for lodging units, I am going to interview them all. I'm going to ask for things that I probably won't even get, right? Financial statements. What's your runway? Like, I've had people chime in now and tell stories of they've engaged a builder or a manufacturer that, or even just a vendor on a wider scale that they paid a bunch of money to and then went bankrupt. And the company shut down mid contract, right? It happens. And so you have the right, it might narrow your pool of potential vendors of people that are willing to come and play ball and kind of open up the kimono, so to speak, and show you behind closed doors and reveal all their secrets to win the deal. But at the end of the day, that's all you can do.
Yeah, really well said. And Matt, just as I described in this episode, obviously this is a long one, but we've done this as a really deep dive into this story. It's fascinating. It's garnered a ton of interest. I think people appreciate how real and open and honest you've been, sharing the story and this kind of experience. Just as a final note to put the bow on this, is there anything else apart from the lessons that you just shared that you kind of want to share with folks, or how you kind of see this capping off? And I know we've talked about the future and kind of what's next, but just want to give you a time to just kind of, if you want, put a bow on it, or wrap this up as far as sharing the story of this experience and what you've gone through.
Yeah, so love connecting with people. If you are going down a similar path, happy to chat and give thoughts. One of the best things about just kind of sharing the journey with people is the connections that you make along the way. That's been one of the most rewarding things. So don't hesitate to reach out, and that's about it. I'm an open book for better or worse. I think it's been a little bit of a double-edged sword in my life, but I don't think I'll ever change it. Is just share, right? In our world where so many gurus and big success stories, and right, it makes it so much harder as an entrepreneur because you're constantly benchmarking yourself against these, rocket ship stories of, insane success, because that's what gets broadcasted out there. So that's why it felt important for me to share this, right? Because I think I've been out there representing myself as somebody who's shares it no matter what and is transparent, and I want to keep that up. But I think it also serves to balance the typical majority of the feed that you see out there. That's big wins and big announcements and success, and I think it contributes to all the things that we've been talking about of feeling disconnected and lonely, and like our social media digital world of everybody's having a great time all the time and everything's rosy. It's just not reality. So anything I can do to, you know, add a dose of reality in those things, I'll do it.
Yeah, I've been a part of the story from the beginning. This certainly is not going to be the end. I know just like everybody else in the audience or those who listened, we're going to be excited to see what's next, Matt. You've been, resilient, somebody I've looked at as we joked before we started here of like you're always trying to make it happen, right? And you put in the effort to make it work. This certainly won't be the last chapter of your story, and I think all of us are looking forward to seeing what's next. So I appreciate you taking the time today and letting me get a chance to interview and tell this story in audio format, and hopefully everybody got as much value out of it as I did.